Today, we have our amazing poet laureate of Taos, Miguel Santistevan. He's going to speak to us on The Word was with God, Language and the Cultivation of Consciousness. I love that title. That is a beautiful title, Miguel. His research interests are in the adaptation of crops and traditional irrigated and dryland agriculture systems of the Upper Rio Grande and Sangre de Cristo mountains. Miguel and Margaret, his beautiful wife, who has spoken here a lot, and his lovely daughters have tended to their home-scale farm since 2001. And we are very honored to have you here with us today, Miguel Santistevan.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
What a good vibe in this room. The songs and probably everybody's intention. You know, it reminds me of the feeling I get when I go to church. You know, I guess this is a church, right? But I grew up in a Catholic church, kind of, and that's where my story begins. Is you know, I wasn't raised with religion or spirituality. My mom was a single mom, and when we look back, you know, our lives was kind of crazy about how she became a single mom and had to raise my brother and I, and you know, surviving in the world and what she wanted for us. So it was a lot of survival mode, and my mom, I guess, didn't really have a good experience with religion growing up, being the child of very deep-rooted Catholics. So she just decided not to raise my brother and I with religion. And but you know, in the summers, my mom had to, you know, took that as an opportunity to do more schoolwork and work an extra waitress job because she could ship my brother and I to Taos, to the grandparents. So my brother and I, younger brother, would spend our summers here in Taos, most of our summers up until I was in like 5th grade. In fact, I even did 4th grade here. We moved to Taos for a spell. So she would put us on the bus in Albuquerque, tell us not to get off the bus till Grandma and Grandpa got us off the bus in Taos. And we would make the journey in the bus, and then we get off the bus and spend the summer with Grandma and Grandpa. And of course, my grandparents are very dedicated, devout Catholics, or were, and you know, they were mayordomos of the chapel, and you know, they took care of the church, and you know, were always a presence there. So we would come, and then of course my grandmother would take this as an opportunity to indoctrinate us or to teach us. So every summer I found myself in catechism, and kind of like a summer camp's catechism, and then of course we were going to church on Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings. And then we also went to church, you know, for family holidays, and the whole family would get together. But that was my only experience with church, you know. And I would come into the church, and if you've ever been in Our Lady of Guadalupe, you know, beautiful carvings. A lot of those carvings done by my neighbor, Pedro Chavez, and a really accomplished carpenter and carver. And I didn't know that at the time, but you know, if you go in that church, it's beautiful. And it has this type of feeling, you know, it's a big open space. You can feel the prayers in the room, generations, you know, my grandmother's included. So I would walk in there, and you know, we'd always sit in our particular pew, and up on the banco there, you know, we're going up to the high ceiling. It says, you know, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Really nice letters, you know, kind of like calligraphy. So I must have read that message 100, 200 times. Especially when I would get bored in church, looking around. Oh, and again was the word, and I never really sunk in. So, that was my experience, and luckily I did go to catechism and all this stuff, I became, I paid attention, I learned the prayers, I learned the stories, the Gospels and the Old Testament and all this stuff. And then, after a few days or a week or two with my one grandma, then I had the opportunity to go spend time with my other grandma, with my dad's mom. And they had since divorced, which you didn't do in those days, but so I wasn't really raised with my grandfather. I had a step grandfather. But when I would hang out with my dad's mom, my grandma Lupita, she was a Jehovah's Witness. And and took it, they didn't have catechism per se, but I did go to Bible studies that she would go and they would study the Bible. And then, our way of going to bed and all this was she had this yellow book of my book of Bible stories. And we would read the book of Bible stories and then we'd reference the Bible and then we'd open the Bible and we'd go to the scripture and we'd read the scripture. So I grew up that way and I'm grateful for that because, I feel like I really learned the Bible. I really learned what Christianity is. And it made me ask a lot of questions. Why are we worshiping the same Jesus, but we have different religions? Why don't my grandmas get along when we're both, and I'm not saying they didn't get along, but, they would always poke and say what the other religion didn't have that their religion had. And so I was like, my whole life, I was like, well, wait a minute. Same Jesus, right? Same Christianity, different religions. What's really going on? Then I go back to Albuquerque and get on with my regular life of playing in the streets and growing up in the 70s. And, but this always lingered with me, Then later, we moved out of Albuquerque, we moved to Los Alamos, and my mom did really well for herself. She got a master's degree in public administration, and moved us up to Los Alamos, and still we weren't raised with any religion. In the meantime, my grandfather had gotten terminally ill. And his dying wish was that we would be baptized. So I was baptized when I was 12, and my godparents were my grandparents, and my grandfather passed shortly thereafter. And so while I was going to school in Los Alamos, I started to freak out on the nuclear industry. I started to realize what a nuclear bomb is, and what the Cold War is, and why they needed something like the whip sight. And the thing that really rattled my cage in the whole thing was, every now and then in Los Alamos, an air raid siren goes off in the lab. And you can hear it, drifting over the mesa tops. And then the ground rumbles. Sometimes it's a big rumble, sometimes it's a small rumble. One particular time it shook the windows, shook the house. And I was in the house with my friends and I said, "What is that?" And my friend says, the guy who played guitar in my band, played in a band, and he says, "That's my dad." And I said, "Well, what does your dad do at the lab?" And he said, "He's not allowed to talk about it, but he's a mechanical engineer." And he said that that's his sighting. And so I started to reflect on what is my relationship to the earth. What is all of our relationship to the earth? What is our relationship beyond the earth? Life after death. We're creating machines that could kill everything on the earth 7 times over. What kind of responsibility is that? What is our place in all this? So I had those questions as a 15-year-old. And And then one time when I was about 15, I was with my grandma, and and she looked up from the dining room table and she tells me, mijito, it would make me really happy if you got your first Holy Communion. So I said, really? I never thought of that. If that would make you happy, Grandma, I'll look into it. So I called the Catholic Church and I became a member of RCIA, or I started going to these classes, and I think the pastor, at first he was grateful that, someone of my age, teenage, I was the youngest one there. I tried to get my brother to go, he didn't want to go. So I was, everyone else there was older, but man, did I have some questions. Los Alamos, how do we call ourselves Christian? War machine, military industrial complex, what's really going on? So I think he was happy when, I finally got my first Holy Communion, and we could both get on with our spiritual lives without each other. But the questions still weren't answered. So when I got to college, I became an activist, protester, all of these things. And I came across this man who was part of the Atrisco Land Rights Council. He's the one who introduced me to what, if you know anything about me, that he's the one who introduced me to who you know me as somebody who knows about the land grants, the traditions, the acequias, the agriculture. Before that, I was an expert in, heavy metal and skateboarding. But I met this man, Lauro Silva was his name, and so he became a great friend of mine, and he actually took my family to Mexico once. And we went to Mexico, and he was there because he was part of this, of an Aztec group called Xinasli, and they're one of the poncheros. They're Aztec dancers, not the ones you see on the plaza with feathers and all this stuff. These ones wore white and a red belt, a red sash, and that was it. They were humble, they looked at the ground, they were very deferential to the church. A lot of their ceremonies happened in the church. The Aztec dancers you see now broke away from the tradition that I'm talking about that was imposed on the people by the Catholic Church and the Spanish way back when. But I had this opportunity to go to Mexico and participate in a ceremony. And so I went to this ceremony in the slums of Mexico City. This is not something that would be open to the average, to the general public, let's say. Of course, in Mexico City, I think, the general public is different than what I'm talking about here, but, because there was a lot of people there. But I found myself in a very remote part of Mexico, very remote and dense, kind of scary part of Mexico City. And we did this ceremony. And it was for Chalma, I believe. It's, there's 7 ceremonies that the Aztecs or the Mexica followers of that tradition have to do. And this was one of them, and it was in May. And so I came into the ceremonial chamber, kind of like a room about this size, and it had an altar with shelving and all this. And I freaked out when I looked at the altar. Candles were burning, incense. And, on one side of the altar were all these Aztec symbols. Later I learned who these symbols represented, but if I would have really looked, I might have been able to figure it out there, because on the other side of the altar on the same shelves were Catholic saints. I later learned that, when the Mexica, which is the proper name for that culture, Aztecs is one band of the Mexica culture. But, when they say Tlaloc, that's in their language, in their cosmology, and they acknowledge that same energy as San Juan, St. John the Baptist, the energy or the element of water. When they had Ehecateo, the god of the wind, on one side of the altar, On the other side was San Lorenzo, who celebrate now August 10th, the saint that brings the wind, that is responsible for the wind. They had Mary, the Mother of God, on one side of the altar, and they had Tonantzin, Mother Earth, on the other. Same energies, same concept. I later learned from the Maestro Andres Segura, who I'm eternally grateful for having met. He was the one leading the ceremony that night, that they were ready to accept the Catholic and Christianity, because they understood that there's one spirituality, kind of like a mountain. You know, the mountain, Taos Mountain looks the way it looks to us from this side, but if you're skiing or you're in Blue Lake, the top of Taos Mountain looks different, but it's the same mountain, and there's only one top of the mountain. So, you know, and we're all, with all these religions that we practice, you know, we're climbing the same mountain. Some of the ways up the mountain have switchbacks, and, you know, we can take our time getting to the top and rest. And others of us are stuck on the side of a cliff or a crag in a snowstorm, trying to get to the top of the same mountain. Probably oblivious to the ones on the other side who are making their way up the switchbacks. So it was an eye-opening thing, you know, again, reflecting on my grandparents and the importance of religion, but yet seeing that the only problem with Catholicism and Christianity on most indigenous cultures was the fact that it was imposed. If it would have just been offered, it would have been incorporated, because, you know, there was that acknowledgement that always won. And so I started to learn more about the cosmology of the Mexica, and then of course, everyone's always looking at the Tonarama, the sunstone, you know, this Aztec calendar, they call it. You know, translated, I understand there's a lot of words for it, but it's the great mechanism of the universe. It's like a clock. It shows the movements of all the planets. Simultaneously, it tells the history of all the people, the 4 races of people. It's a periodic table. It's so much that it would take me forever to talk about what I know, and as I would talk about it, I would start saying things that I don't even remember I know, because I spent so much time learning about it. And in going through all these mechanisms and thinking about the ceremonies and all this, you know, I said, well, you know, I'm not necessarily Mexica. You know, I probably have Tlaxcalteca blood, which is another culture of the Mexica. There were the Aztecs, the Tlaxcalas, the Nahuas, you know, different. There were like 7 cultural groups within the Mexica culture. It was the Tlaxcalas who were the ones who came with the Spanish, starting in 1592, 1598, that came with Oñate to help settle this area. So, you know, there's, in our Hispanic bloodline, is a lot of Tlaxcalteca, Mexican native blood. So, you know, but that's not really, you know, where do I fit in all this? Do I put on the red headband and follow the ceremonial calendar? You know, I might always feel like an imposter if I did that. You know, I wasn't raised that way. I was kind of raised Catholic. Should I go back into the Catholic Church? Now, sometimes I think I should be an hermano. I should, you know, honor the lineage I was taught. But, you know, luckily I had the opportunity to engage the teacher, Maestro Andres Segura. I actually had him in my truck and drove him around for about 5 or 6 days for him to give talks all over New Mexico, because he had groups here. So I had to learn, what is the takeaway message from this sunstone? What has utility for me? You know, in the late 20th and early 21st century. So there was two things that I got out of all this, you know, for me not to necessarily sign up and dedicate my entire life to this culture and tradition. The first question was, why was this calendar made in the first place? Like, you know, if you study calendars, you know why the Roman calendar was made. It's so all of us can pay taxes. That's why it's confusing. And that's actually a fact, if you look into it. You know, why do all the months have different days? The moon cycle doesn't have different days. You know, I learned that on the Tonalama, everything is synchronized with the universe. It's in 52-year cycles that are broken into 13-year cycles. That, you know, ultimately, if you look at all the overlap of these cycles, 264 days overlapping with 260 days, they all line up at 33,000 years. And they say that they've been keeping track of this for 4 cycles of that. That humanity on Earth is actually over 120,000 years old, and that's how old recorded history is, if you know how to read petroglyphs and the calendars that were left before. Stonehenge and all the great mysteries. All of us have been here a long time, so that was pretty interesting to me to challenge my concept of time. But the concept of time was so important because he said we were in charge of making a calendar because the Mother Earth required us to relate with her in a deeper way through maize. And maize requires an understanding of the seasonal and cosmic cycles. There are certain corns that are only planted in certain planetary and celestial cycles. Gifts from worlds past that we would have no way to understand. Simply because, especially all of us now, and I'm speaking to you in English, and we're all thinking and speaking in English. There used to be other languages, and your language is how you relate to the world. So the first thing was time, how we relate to time, how we understand where we're at in the celestial and cosmic season, the planting season. And then the next thing was language. That the story on the calendar is the story of development and evolution of consciousness on Earth. It is instructions for living, because we could talk about free will, and in that way we could talk about free language. Our language is free. I can say whatever I want, and I can think whatever I want. If I tell you I almost ran over a purple rabbit with antlers on the way over here, half of you imagined a purple rabbit with antlers in your mind. That is the power of language, to create imagery, to create concepts. And the story on the calendar talks about the 4 races of people and the 4 languages that were taught to them by the 4 elements. The first language was brought about by the needs of the blue corn. And the water people came to be. And they, the element of water, who's actually an entity. The water is alive. When we say that, water is life, we put on bumper stickers. But what does that mean? Is it just, water is life, 3 words, syllables? We could say, oh yeah, that's poetic. But no, actually the water is alive. In fact, it's more alive than we are because it knows that it's alive through us, and it knows that it's alive through every other thing that has ever been alive. And so that was able to be articulated within the minds of a human being. All the other animals have then, plants have their instructions of how to be them. We have our instructions too. You could say it's in our genetic code. But, we also have free will. So we're not necessarily following the original instructions. We don't have to. But the fact that we don't have to allows us to explore these areas of our mind that we only have access to because we have language. And the first language, like I said, is understood, and there's probably even more ancient history than this, but the water language. And that was given to, the Atlanteans. And there's still some debate about Atlantis, but not if you're following the ancient cultures. And the evidence is in the language. The Nahuatl word for water is Atl, A-T-L. And in English, we are still saying Atlantic. We're still saying Atlantis. So that's a sound and a construct that relates to water. The next people that came about were the people of the earth. Mother Earth taught them their way, gave them their language, their dance, their cuisine, their way of relating to the earth. And that expanded their minds into consciousness. Then the people of the wind, the people of the yellow corn, they were taught by the entity of air and learned their ways. So I'm thinking of, a lot of Asian cultures with Qi and martial arts, the way they speak, the way they relate. And then finally, the people of the white corn were born, and fire taught them that way. And that made the circle of humanity complete, like arms and legs, the four races of people. Once you made the arms and legs, now you can develop the mind. So now we're in a world where all those races and all those elements are mixed together in our children, right? Because my children, for sure, have Cherokee blood and German, not, was it German? No, it was, they were from Wales, is where my wife found out her mom's mom was from. So, my children are people of the white corn, people of the red corn, and, maybe I found out through my mom's lineage were Portuguese Jews. Who would have known? Over there studying Jehovah's Witness and Catholicism. And my other grandma too, the one who was Jehovah's Witness, her last name was Raed. Which I later learned is short for Israel. And then all the Raeles were Sephardic Jews who were trying to escape the church. That's why they ended up in Arroyo Hondo, which was about as far away from the church as you could get. So, consciousness was developed through all these elements, all these gifts. And it's crazy, when I saw that movie, The Last Airbender, and what all that's about. This is part of our consciousness, our collective consciousness, and now it's coming out in other ways. That we are connected to all of these elements. Whether you believe it through, religious and spiritual metaphor or scientific quantum physics fact, we are connected through all these elements. And the combination of elements is what makes everything possible. And if you look at how these combinations of elements have resulted in us at this time, the other thing that is significant about the calendar is day number 17. which is on the calendar, there's 20 days. And 18 months of 20 days is one of the calendars. And there's other calendars on there, but day number 17 is a symbol known as, oh wait, I might be getting this wrong. Don't quote me on this. There's two symbols that I'm sometimes get confused. Because, but there's a symbol on the Aztec calendar. It's called Tecpat, flint knife. And if you look at the tonalama, I was gonna bring mine, but it's so small it wouldn't have done you any good. But if you look at the Aztec calendar, it has this symbol in the center. And instead of this half eye, it has the sun god, and he's sticking his tongue out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a symbol on his tongue that is Tecpat, or flint knife. So what is the significance of that? Is that language is a flint knife. What do you do with flint? You knap it, and you can make arrowheads and knives, axe heads, sharp edge, for utilitarian purposes, even surgery, cutting up vegetables, or killing. That's language. I can also take flint and hit it with steel and start a fire, which can either warm me or burn your house down. That is language. And that is the gift of the sun, our sun. So when you look at the calendar, you can kind of see maybe here, in this symbology, there's a human being in there, arms and legs. There's also a butterfly and an eagle in there. But when you look at the actual calendar and it's a sun god in the middle with the tongue sticking out, the whole entirety of the concept of the calendar itself is the earth, the container for consciousness. And in that container is, of course, the earth, but all the planets, the movements of all the planets, the movements of all the stars within themselves and relative to each other. And then the stars themselves, and especially our star, creating the light that is then absorbed by the container so that we become solar cells, solar travelers in a flesh body given to us by this Mother Earth, bones like the rocks, blood like the rivers. But the spark that is of my mind that is speaking to you now, of my heartbeat that is keeping me alive so I can speak, so I can think, that is a spark coming from the sun, that together with the earth is creating this opportunity for me to be here, for me to speak to you in whatever words I might come up with next, thinking they might be my words. But actually, the source of all these words are from somewhere else. And we can access those words and that knowledge. And other people have written about this, but we've got to get rid of the mental chatter. We've got to go back to the original sounds. The sounds that were carved initially with the tekpat, with the flint knife. The first sound being which is actually three sounds, the Holy Trinity. And in contrast to no sound, nothing. So that is the original duality, is nothing and something. And the something happened because somehow, somewhere that actually couldn't be anywhere and couldn't ever happen because it didn't exist in the first place, But there was a tech pot, a flint knife, that carved nothing into sound. And that change from nothing into vibration was the initial spark, so to speak, that allowed everything to exist. And so in that sound, I actually learned a lot of this from the Mexica tradition. But go read the illustrated book of yoga by Swami Vishnu Divananda, talking about where yoga comes from. Hindu. It's all the same cosmology. In fact, when I was deciding what to wear this morning, I have a shirt that says Yoga Punks, and it has Shiva on it, and she's sticking her tongue out. Maybe you've seen that. Because they're talking about the same thing. Because all of us humans have the same root. So from carving the void into the entirety of the universe with a flint knife, we could call it the Big Bang, the great singularity, or whatever, which I would say is one of a series of infinite pulsations of this universe that are constantly, infinitely happening, and actually never happened, because it's actually all happening within our mind. Because as soon as my mind is gone, it's all gone. But we're all here. So it has to keep on. Because it's not just me who's thinking about it. It's not just my neurons that are flowing across the void, my neurotransmitters flying across a void, accessing the nothing on its way to the next neurotransmitter to create a flow. So that is the nature of consciousness, is that there was a spark created in nothing to carve out reality, and now we can carve our own realities with our own language. And how we speak to ourselves and how we relate to each other with that language is the most important thing we have. Because language is power. And all of it's coming from the spark of the stars. And it's crazy to think about that. If you were a star, and your starlight is traveling 800 million light years to get to my eye, it took my eye 800 million years to be able to see that light. But because of the theory of relativity, the photon that left that star traveling the speed of light experiences no time. So it got to my mind instantly. In fact, it was already here. Because it has no time. And that is the ultimate consciousness of me trying to ascend my mind, my consciousness, my vibration to that of the stars from which I came. That we are all cosmic travelers. And that our spaceship is this flesh body. And our control panel is the language we use. And you can drive this spaceship wherever you want it to go. And right now you might be saying, I gotta figure out how to pay the mortgage. I gotta figure out how to deal with my neighbor's partying lifestyle. I gotta figure out why these people are driving so fast down my road. Whatever it is, we're using that language. Who's gonna be the next president? What's gonna happen after that? We're occupying our minds with the language of the times. And it's getting harder and harder for us to create our own reality. But another thing in this Tonalamak, is this center dot at the bottom. See, all of these are the worlds we've already gone through. And then there's that center dot at the bottom, which is the world we're supposed to be coming to. Because there is a meaning of life. There is a consciousness that needs to participate in the cosmos. Right now we're bound to this earth. You know, all of us are thinking about our themes. What car are we driving? What house are we in? You know, what potholes need fixing on my road? We're all involved in what is our terrestrial reality. But we're supposed to get to a point where we're cosmic citizens with other beings that are waiting for us. And unfortunately, we're too stubborn. We're too stubborn because we're too old and we're too stuck in our ways. And we're also speaking English. The only language that is based, while all these Anglo-Saxon languages, based on the verb to be, is. The I am, Miguel Santistevan, that is my car, that is my house, those are my kids. It's based on ownership, based on control, all based on the verb is. This is so profound that physicists studying quantum physics are saying we can only explain what we're seeing in the Hadron Collider with math, because the English language doesn't cut it. How are we going to talk about this for people who don't understand math? They finally decided that they need to make the study of Dene, the Navajo language, the only indigenous language that is completely documented. Taos Pueblo, you know, we'll never learn Tiwa in that way. We'll never learn, you know, they've guarded their language because there's secrets in their language. They can't be understood by English speakers, by fire speakers. But there are physicists who now are learning Dene so that they can understand the relationship of quantum physics to, you know, itself, to the universe and everything. And it's because the language allows for that cosmic understanding. So that's our challenge, is to, first of all, get our language under control. What are we thinking? What are we telling other people? Because how we speak and what we speak is going to create the reality around us. And this could be profound. You could use your language to heal people. You could use your language to heal yourself. You could use your language to fly. It just depends how focused you are, how dedicated you are to it. So one time I asked the maestro, well, how does this calendar end? And he says, well, there is no end without a beginning. That's your fire way of thinking. That's your Christian indoctrinated end of the world thinking. It's not the end of the world, it's the beginning of the world. It's the beginning of consciousness. I said, but how are we gonna deal with all this nuclear stuff? How are we gonna deal with all of this contamination, climate change, all this? He said, all that's in your mind. He says, you and everyone else believe it, because that's the only logical end of your way of thinking. He's all, you need to challenge that and how you're thinking about it. And if you don't worry, because there's people among you who aren't limited by your language. And I go, well, where are they? He said, they're the children. The children who still have their imagination, who sometimes don't know if it's imaginary or real. He's all, they're the ones. He's all, because actually all of this is a dream that we all collectively dream. We agree on the dream, and so it's happening. How are you going to wake up from this dream? Sorry, it's going to be really hard to do that, because we're stuck in our language. We're stuck in our way of thinking. But the children aren't. The children are going to dream another dream. They're going to fix all these problems that you think there are, that don't need to be, And things can be healed a lot faster than you think, just by the collective intention. So he said, your job is to protect the children and listen to them. Make sure when they go through these hard times through the other side that they have the tools they need to survive. The seeds, the corn. So now you understand why I am so deeply rooted and convicted in what I believe and what I do with agriculture. Because it's those seeds that allowed us to develop the mind and the consciousness. These people grew the seeds so that I can have an iPhone, so that somebody else can invent a car or do something grandiose with their mind, like do the theory of relativity. You know, Einstein didn't have to grow his own corn, but there was a lot of corn being grown for him. And that was the gift that allowed him the luxury of thought and language to develop his concept that actually moved the entire society, and global consciousness forward. So that's where we're at. What are the practical tools? Connect yourself to the earth. Connect yourself to the purest thought. And wait and hope. Pay attention to the children. Use your language in a way to create healing, happiness, joy. First of all, within yourself. That's the first thing I tell students. I don't care if you say bad language, but I do care how you talk to yourself. Don't call yourself stupid. Don't say you're not worth it. Because when you say those kinds of things, you're busting out the tech pot. You're carving a reality for yourself. Tell yourself how awesome and capable you are. That you can heal. That you can overcome. That you can persevere. And say it out loud. And say it with other people. And get into the practice of carving a reality like a tech pot knife, so that we can have the world that we need to have, that we were intended to have. Because this isn't, what do they call it? Random, undifferentiated, stochastic variation that Darwin said was the basis of evolution. No, we are on a journey. We have things we have to do here, not just for us, but now, because we've created all of these problems, we have to undo what we did and do it in a good way. And like I say, the good news is we have the tools. Starts right here with our mind.
Thank you, Miguel.
And our language.
I gotta go to a wedding.
And then we're and then it's the kids that will take us there. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have one song that has 5 languages that are all peace. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shanti, 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 paz. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shalom salam, peace be with you. Shanti, 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 paz. May we all learn each other's languages and live in peace together. And we're going to sing our love song that is right there behind you. All the words are there. Now there is love on earth, and it has begun with me. Now there is love on earth, the love that was meant to be. With all our relations, loved ones all are we. Now I walk with my family in perfect harmony. Love has begun with me, and this is the moment now. With every breath I take, let this be my joyous vow, to take each moment and live each moment in love eternally. Now there is love on earth, and it has begun with me. We are the light, the love, and the presence. Wherever we are, love is, and all is well. Thank you, Miguel. That was awesome. You are great. That was awesome. We are all connected, and we're all going to eat food, except for me, because I'm going to go eat food at a wedding.
Speaking of food, if anybody wants some, chile.
Ooh, Chile! Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, go.